everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be diving into the new holiday palettes that were recently launched from Hourglass. This year they launched 3 palettes. I have all 3 of the palettes here, and because there are 3 palettes, I've decided to divide this up into 3 videos. I really don't feel like I can give a good thorough review if I try to cram all of the palettes into one video. So I'm going to start with the elephant palette today, and then tomorrow and the next day I will upload my review of the butterfly and the tiger palette, just so you guys can see each one of the palettes and how they look on my skin, and also sharing tons and tons of swatches of each of these palettes next to a bunch of other palettes. You guys know that I do like to share a lot of swatches and comparisons, and if I was doing a thorough job swatching each one of these palettes next to a bunch of others, it would be so confusing, and I just felt like it was too much in one video. You guys know that I like to be thorough, so I'm gonna give each one of the palettes a good thorough review. So let's go ahead and jump into the information about this elephant palette. It comes with 6 shades in the palette. 2 are existing and 4 are brand new. These 2 shades right up here are existing, and these 4 shades right here are all new. These palettes each retail for $85, and I picked them up on the Hourglass website. This palette seems like it works for like light, medium category. So I felt like this palette was probably most suited for my complexion. I will list popular foundations out on the market and what shades I wear in those foundations, so you guys can get an idea of my complexion, so you guys can see how these apply on my skin tone. This year's palettes are very unique because they are designed and created by a London-based artist named Katie Scott, and they are celebrating the elephant, tiger, and the butterfly. Now, the one thing that I do want to mention is that these are customizable. If you like the color story better in the tiger palette, but you necessarily may not like the actual packaging, you can swap it out for the elephant or the butterfly, which I really like that they added that piece to it. That's kind of fun. Also, this year's holiday palettes, 5% of the profits from the unlocked palettes will support the Non-Human Rights Project in their efforts to secure fundamental rights for animals. Now, here's the thing. I am a huge animal lover, so these palettes were right up my alley. Don't get me wrong. I really liked the packaging overall on the previous years. They've done a really good job on their packaging, but I personally love animals, so these are right up my alley. And I do like that 5% of the proceeds will go to a charity for animals. Last year, they launched these palettes, and I didn't even end up reviewing them because I was kind of bummed out. I felt like they left out a lot of people, and I was kind of bummed out by it, and so I just didn't review them. I wasn't even actually going to buy them. And at the last minute, towards the end of last year, I decided to go ahead and buy them so that I had them in my collection for future reviews and comparisons and stuff like that. But I do like that Hourglass is listening and they are making the steps to be more inclusive, because I think that's been kind of the biggest complaint from everyone, is just they needed to be more inclusive. And I do like that they've taken steps this year to be more inclusive, and I'm excited about these 3 palettes. I really am. So in this video, I'm going to be trying on the elephant palette, sharing my thoughts with you guys as I apply the powders, and then we're going to jump into the swatches and comparisons, and there are a lot of swatches and comparisons. So we'll get into it. I like to share my swatches and comparisons with and without a flash. A flash really helps you to see the undertones of shades. So I have a lot of swatches and comparisons in this video. Once we get through the swatches and comparisons, then we will go ahead and get into my final thoughts. So without further ado, let's jump into the application, and I will see you guys all in my final thoughts. We're going to start with the elephant palette. We're going to open it up. Comes in this really cute packaging, by the way. And this is just really pretty. This shade right here reminds me of a blush that I have from Hourglass, which I'll definitely swatch it next to that shade. But I'm going to go into this one first. Tap off. That blush is beautiful. I love their blushes. They do have good blushes. Okay, I'm gonna wipe the brush off and then I'm gonna go into this one over here and let's see what the difference is on my skin. Not really seeing a huge difference between these two shades on my complexion. This one's maybe a little bit more of a cooler tone pink and this is more warmer, but I'm not seeing like a huge difference between the two. You can kind of tell that in the pan that this is more warmer than the shade, but on the face, it's a subtle difference, very subtle. All right, let's go into the bronzer. I'm gonna be using the new bronzer brush that I got from Sonia G. I am so excited to try this brush. This is the new Jumbo Bronzer Brush. So excited. Now, I haven't washed it yet. All natural haired brushes, I always recommend washing them before you actually use them. I haven't done it yet, but I'm gonna do it anyways. Now, full disclosure, I am wearing a new foundation, so my skin is a little shiny. Right now I'm testing out the new House Labs, so that review will be coming up this week. So I'm gonna go into the bronzer. And I like how the bronzer is here on the corner so that if you are using a larger brush, you can kind of grab it from here without touching the other shades. So what I can tell you, this bronzer is not super dark, which I'm not mad about. It's a very soft bronzer. I definitely need to powder. This foundation is quite shiny, but if you're my complexion, it's a little bit darker than my skin tone. So it gives that softer bronze without being super noticeable. I don't mind the shade of it. I actually quite like it. It's pretty. I'm gonna go ahead and powder because I need to calm down this shine. So I'm gonna grab my Hourglass Translucent Setting Powder, which is my favorite. Okay, so I'm done. I went ahead and put on a little bit of powder to kind of calm down some of the shine. I also wanted to mention I have these two little spots right here on my eyes. I just had Botox done this morning, so you can kind of see on this side it's not there, and you can't see any of the needle marks anywhere on the face because I always get it like right here around the forehead and like right in the center, but right there are a few spots, so they might bruise, but that's okay. So I wanted to point that out. All right, let's move on to the finishing powder. I'm gonna grab this shade right here, which I think is gonna probably work better for me, and I'm gonna put it on this side. That is a very beautiful powder. Very pretty. All right, I'm gonna wipe the brush off and I'm gonna go into this one, which is definitely a little bit more on the pale side. So it's a little bit too light, but I'm not so sure it's gonna make that much of a difference. We'll see. The peachy one I think matches my skin tone better, but they both work on me. They both look good. All right, let's move on to the highlighter. So I'm gonna grab a highlighter brush and I'm gonna go into this really pretty shade right here, which I'm really excited about this. And go right, oh, that is so pretty. That is pretty. So I'm done with the application of this palette. I have a lot to say about this palette, so let's go ahead and jump into the swatches. I'm going to swatch this palette next to a bunch of other products that I have in my collection so you guys can see how this compares and if this is something that you really need in your collection, and then I will get into my final thoughts, so I will see you guys then. I do hope that those swatches and comparisons were helpful. Let me go ahead and get into my final thoughts. I actually really like this palette. I really do. I personally love the bronzer. I think the bronzer is a beautiful, beautiful formula. It's not too strong. It's not too overwhelming. And I really like the way that it looked on my complexion. I love how natural it is. If you have a lighter complexion than I do, this will probably be more of a bronzed look because it is a little bit of that warmer undertone. So it kind of will give you that sun-kissed glow. I think it's a really pretty bronzer. These two blushes are very similar. They just are. And I think most people would never know that I was wearing two different blushes. The differences between these two blushes, even though this one is more cool toned, this one has a little bit more of a shimmering aspect to it, but on the softest way. Like, we all know that Hourglass and their blushes are so beautiful and they have a glow to them, and they're a very soft glow to where they don't emphasize texture, they don't emphasize wrinkles, they just look really beautiful on the skin. So this one does have more of that shimmering aspect to it. It has a little bit more of that glow than this one does. This one is a little bit more of just a softer, a little bit more of a radiant matte, I would say. With that said, they are different as far as the finishes go, but the shades are very similar and on my complexion. Now, again, if you're lighter than I am, they will probably look very different on your skin. But if you are in the medium category, just expect that these blushes will look very similar. One's just a little bit more radiant than the other. But with all of that said, if you have this palette from last year, so this is the Universe Unlocked, the blushes are very similar in these two palettes, and I'm kind of bummed out by that, to be honest with you. So you can see that the blushes do look super similar, right? They have almost the same tone, and I wish that they were different. I really do, especially for those who collect these and buy them every year. If you bought this one last year, I don't really feel like you need this one, as well, the elephant one in particular, because those blush shades are just too similar. And these are $85 palettes. And for me, in order to justify the $85 splurge, there needs to be something different, and because it is so similar to last year's, I don't necessarily think that you need both. But one thing that I will say that this palette has that this palette didn't from last year is the bronzer. So there is a big difference in shade when it comes to the bronzer in this Elephant palette versus the bronzer that's in this Universe Unlocked palette. This is more of kind of just a lighter kind of, I don't know, it doesn't really have a lot of depth to it. And this one in this palette has a little bit more to it. It has more pigment. You can see the difference there. So I do like that the bronzer in the Elephant palette is a little bit more bronzy, has more tone to it. But overall, I love this palette. It is a really beautiful palette and I can see myself using it. Now, just like I mentioned in the intro, I will be doing full dedicated videos to the Tiger palette and also the Butterfly palette. The Butterfly palette is a little bit light for me, but I will definitely still do a dedicated video with all the swatches and comparisons so that you guys can see if this is something that you need in your collection. So that's it for this review. Sound off down below. How many of you guys have picked up these palettes? I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. Sound off down below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in today's video. Don't forget to come back here and watch my review of the Butterfly palette and the Tiger palette. I hope you guys all have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys all in my next video. Love you. Bye.